I have replayed the scene a million times. The forced, stifled laughter, the stiffly starched tablecloth, the filtered light of the fairy lights cutting through the thick atmosphere of denial. Christmas, just like every year, was the carefully constructed theatre of compulsory harmony, a flawless performance I maintained strictly for the gallery, especially for my daughter-in-law and her family. I saw myself as the benevolent matriarch, the impeccable host, the unshakable pillar. I would actually admire myself in that role, the good person, the respected figure. I sought to impress the audience, and often that audience was merely myself, observing my own perfect performance. The mulled wine, the glittering gifts, the exhausting effort to ensure perfection reigned. It all served to reinforce this facade, this towering house of cards I had known to be structurally unsound for decades. My son, Paul, looked at me. I saw no filial affection, no gratitude for this annual display. In his eyes was that icy fixedness, a cold contempt he had never been able to disguise, even as a difficult child. I had always dismissed it as his temperament, his struggle with affection, never attributing it to the guilt I carried. He was waiting. He had patiently and meticulously built this moment, transforming our dining table into a court of judgment. By ensuring his in-laws were present, these external witnesses, these judges uncontaminated by our toxic dynamic, he gave his coming act of humiliation irrefutable legitimacy. He sought to make the lie, my decades of manipulation, socially untenable for me, the woman who could not bear to be ridiculed or have her superiority challenged. He was inverting the debt. I had forced my lie upon him, and he was now forcing his truth upon me in front of those I strove so hard to impress. He needed to ensure his own marriage, his new nuclear family, would never again be fractured by my lingering influence. Christmas is a social ritual, and social rituals are the most fertile ground for the explosion of conflicts we stubbornly refuse to resolve. For hours, we had practiced the weary art of false pretenses, the game of superficial conversation, the forced smile that desperately signaled, "Everything is fine. We are a normal family." But the weight of the secret gnawed at Paul. His sentences were clipped, his silences stretched, thick with the unspoken, those cryptonyms that allowed us to reference the trauma without ever naming it. The atmosphere was a suffocating blend of cinnamon and simmering, repressed resentment. The silence arrived, heavy, not the comfortable lull of dessert, but the chilling prelude to disaster. That is when Clara, my 8-year-old granddaughter, stepped forward. She wore a red dress, the color of innocence, and yet, perhaps, the color of blood. She was armed with the technology that we, the older generation, never truly master. She, the child, became the irrefutable vector of truth. The child, the one most isolated, the rejected figure in the background, is often the one who finds the means to navigate the pitfalls set by adults. The heroine whose perceived purity lends irrefutability to her evidence. She was not a party to my old manipulations. She was the digital hero, the messenger of objective proof. In her small hands, the phone glowed, his open sesame to the truth. I initially thought it was a joke, a silly TikTok video, one of those pranks the new generation obsessed over. I smiled, pretending not to notice the visible tremor in Paul's jaw. Then, I watched Paul's face fall apart, slowly like a fresco peeling away in the rain. The secret I had buried, the childish and dark secret, was taking tangible form on an 8-centimeter screen. A family secret is a pathogen, a poison that diffuses silently from generation to generation. It is embedded in silences, in Freudian slips, affecting the true word. This secret, described as childish or archaic, was rooted in a foundational transgression that occurred during Paul's youth or concerned the deepest core of his identity. To generate the shockwave that followed, the uncontrolled screaming and sobbing, this secret had to be deemed shameful and unavowable. I felt the panic surge, that visceral fear of utter humiliation. My entire life, built on the appearance of normalcy, on the relentless effort to ensure no one knew where we truly came from, was collapsing. I just wanted peace, like others I knew, obsessed with appearing as normal and mundane as possible. The first possibility, the one that terrified me most, was filiation fraud. Paul, at 43, had finally found the answer he sought. He had spent years trying to piece together the puzzle of his history, with his only clue being a precious birth certificate, his sesame for the truth. I had always denied he was a foundling, or that his legal father was not his biological father, or that his parents, officially killed in a distant accident, were still alive. The shock, if this was it, was devastating. The grief over the loss of the idealized parental figure, the rage that he could never embrace his real father, who died believing he had been betrayed. The silence and the betrayal had created a profound identity crisis and irreparable grief. But the sheer horror of the reactions suggested something even darker. The childish secret likely pointed to an act of past violence, severe physical or psychological abuse that Paul suffered in his youth, which I had actively covered up, or perhaps perpetrated. Stories of dark family secrets often involve extreme violence and criminal neglect, children isolated, threatened with death, starved, and deprived of water as punishment. My family manipulation was that active concealment, the threats used to enforce silence, the constant briefing to deny the horror to authorities. The video in this scenario was not a mere dry document, but concrete, objective proof of the past act, a sequence of abuse, a confession, or Paul's own recorded testimony. The shock was maximum because the evidence tore the secret from the manipulable sphere of the mind and materialized it before the gallery. In that precise instant, Paul ceased to be my son. He reverted to the tortured child he had been decades ago. His scream was not a word. It was the primary, visceral manifestation of the repressed trauma violently erupting, the sudden incursion of an ancient trauma. It was cathartic rage, the fury that had been imprisoned in his body throughout his adult life. He screamed. It was not a cry of anger. It was the sound of a foundation crumbling, the cry of fundamental betrayal that nullified his very identity. Helene, his wife, did not scream. She simply collapsed in tears. Her sobs were not solely her own pain, but the echo of her husband's suffering. She displayed intense secondary empathy in the face of the unbearable horror. By collapsing, she unconditionally validated Paul's pain and definitively separated herself from my toxic system. Those tears marked the psychic break, the act of protecting their new family. She drew an invisible line. She chose the revealed reality, however devastating, and her husband's truth. Their couple aligned in shared grief and horror. My humiliation was nothing compared to the destruction of their world. The secret was torn from the silence, thrown onto the Christmas table. The party was over. The trial had begun. This kind of revelation leaves deep scars. To continue decoding the silences that shape our lives and the dynamics that lead to these brutal collapses, keep an eye on our upcoming analyses. If the desire to delve deeper and understand the unavowable moves you, perhaps it's time to explore other stories as intense as this one. I watched my own world crumble, yet my brain, programmed for self-admiration and narcissism, could only focus on one thing: my humiliation. I rationalized. He throws fits of rage if he is ridiculed or his superiority is challenged. But this time it was not my fit. It was his. Paul had achieved his goal: to live in an authentic way and to tell the truth. He had stopped excusing the inexcusable and set radical boundaries. He had transformed private, manipulated shame into a verifiable social fact, a demand for justice. He wanted to be accepted for who he truly was, not for the falsity I had constructed. The video, that tiny digital file, had initiated a systemic crisis. The collapse of the family myth was final. For Paul, the Christmas act was a liberation. For me, the end of a world where I wielded absolute control. There was a sort of tragic justice in the act of Clara, the child, who had been the instrument of this destruction. It is often the child, the isolated one, the rejected one, who finds the means to navigate the pitfalls set by the adults. If the dark secret revealed constitutes a criminal act, abuse, fraud of filiation, neglect, the video is crucial evidence that can initiate or reopen legal proceedings. The penalty incurred for the publication of illicit content, if it proves a crime, can range up to 20 years in prison. Paul's objective is perhaps not merely to punish, but to obtain the recognition of our role in his tragic history, so he can finally look serenely towards the future. The trial Paul conducted in public was just the prelude to a social admission of guilt. Today, there is the silence of withdrawal, the emptiness left by the guests' chairs who departed without a word after the drama. The path toward any form of repair for me must begin with ending the denial, but I cannot help but ruminate on the humiliation. Paul, meanwhile, has begun the mourning process for his childhood and the parental figure I manufactured. He must now, with Helene, carefully manage the impact of this violent truth on little Clara, the agent of that truth. The greatest risk is that the trauma will not be passed down to her, transforming her bravery into a new, negative legacy. His parents' role will be to transform this drama into a narrative of courage and authenticity, allowing them to create a new family framework founded on truth. But secrets, I know, live within us, and they never leave us. The following Christmas, there will be no room for false pretenses. There will be perhaps only emptiness, or perhaps an attempt at reconstruction on the terrible, naked foundation of truth. The silence will be our only witness. If the echo of this domestic drama resonates within you, it is because the truth, even the darkest truth, always deserves to be revealed. Don't miss any of our upcoming chronicles on the hidden faces of human drama. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing.